Howdy YouTube, welcome back to another episode of DRG. I'm the host, Nathan. As if you've been following along, I'm doing a budget rebuild 460 for a 72 Highboy. The previous episode I just demonstrated hanging pistons on rods, heating them up and heating up the rods and pressing the pin and piston onto the old rods to be for the new rebuild. I think I quickly discussed piston ring gap, and that's where we're going to pick up today. I'll go through and show how I do piston ring gap. To bring up the speed, I've already done the top rings, all 8 of them, but I'll bring you in and show you exactly what I done, and then I'll go over some information on the piston ring manufacturer has a recommendation, and then the piston manufacturer also has a recommendation, and then kind of what I did to get to the math I did to get to this come up with the measurement I needed, and how I obtained getting to that goal. So in the last episode, you'll see that I have rings, the top ring in every cylinder. So I came out here, did another quick hone, cleaned up the cylinders a little bit more. I haven't done my finish hone yet because I knew I was going to be sliding a piston in here multiple times with rings to get my end gap measurements. So I rough honed, or just a little more finish to them than the previous time, to clean them up a little bit more, get my cylinder size closer to where my finished cylinder bore is going to be after I hone it. And then I set a ring in each cylinder, use an old piston upside down to push it in and keep it square. And then if you can really see down here on the end, maybe I could shine a light up here. Hold on a second, we'll try that. Grab a flashlight. Turn the crank. And you can kind of see. You see the gap where you can kind of see the light through. That's basically what you're measuring. Once you get the ring in the cylinder square, you use a set of feeler gauges, and you just keep using different feeler gauge combinations till you find the gauge combination that gives you your current measurement as where they're at, without having to do any filing. Now I'm sure there's multiple ways of doing ring gap. If you don't mind filing in every single ring that you pull out of the box, once you've determined what number you want or what your gap size is, you just stick a ring in there, square it up, find out where your current measurement is, pull it out, file the end of one end of the ring. You file one end of the ring, put it back in there, measure again, see if you're gotten to where your spec is, and then you move on to the next cylinder and do that, next cylinder do that, next cylinder that, and you could possibly file all 8 rings, and you could do it that way. Well, since I took the time to measure my bores, I knew from my measurements that this is a tight cylinder and this was a loose cylinder, I went and I'd take the first ring out of the box and I would stick it in this cylinder, square it up, measure, write that number down, kind of see where I have up here. I'd write that number down, pull that ring out, move to the next cylinder, stick it in the square it in this bore. So basically just take an old piston, no rings on it, set it in the bore, spin it, make it sure until it feels square, pull it out, set it up. There's what I would do. Get my feeler gauges. And then run the feeler gauge down my ring gap. When I found get to the feeler gauge that would barely fit and I couldn't push it through, that would be okay, that's my max size. And then I'd go back one, so like this is a 25, and you could see right there that that's a I have 30 written down there, and that's the number I ended up going with. How I came up with that number I'll explain in a bit. But like, so I'm using a 25, and you can see 25 slides right through there, no drag whatsoever. So then I would go combination. I think this feeler gauge stops at 0.026. So to get to 30, I think I ended up using the 10. Sorry, I'm gonna bumble you guys around. You're gonna watch jiggle as I scroll through. So I take my 20 and a 10, put them together, and this is my tight cylinder, and run the 30 through there, and you get, no, I'm pushing the ring. And I fumbled. Feeler gauge is down. The 20 and the 30 would go in there with just a slight drag, and as you can see, I stuck the 20 and 30 in there, slid it, and then the ring went with it. So that's a little bit more than a slight drag, but most of the time, if I do this, if I square up the feeler gauge and not use, I'm trying to use my non-dominant hand here, it would go through with a slight drag, but I could slide it through back and forth with a slight drag, and therefore that's 30. And then I wrote down my measurement, left that ring in there, and then I'd go to the next ring in the box and try it, and each ring in each cylinder, and and that ring would go, I would leave that ring in whatever cylinder was the closest to my desired target. So like I had one ring where this was this is my big cylinder. I had one ring right out of the package where I stuck it in there, did my feeler gauges, and it was like 32 out of the package, and I'm like, well, that's loose, I don't want to go that big. So wrote down 32 and then tried the ring elsewhere, and I think it ended up over on the opposite bank over here. These cylinders were all fairly close to the same size, so I'd put a ring in one, get like a 28, write down a 28, stick it in this cylinder, would get like a 28, maybe get a 29 in that cylinder, maybe a 27 in that cylinder. So moving it around, I could get different measurements on a particular ring, and since I was aiming for 30, whatever cylinder either got me 30 or got me a 29, that's where that ring went, and I'd keep going back to the box and try my next ring and do that procedure over and over and over again. So when I got all said and done, I was barely filing any of these rings. I think I only had to actually take one ring where I actually had to take a couple hundred thousandths off a ring, because I just couldn't get what I wanted, and I only had one ring left. So we'll leave that up here, pick that up, come back over here. So I'm using Holley rings. When you open the box, it's going to be divided. You have your top ring up here, second groove ring down here, and then these are your oil control rings, or bottom groove, which you get 2 of these thin wires and 1 of the wavy. I'm sure they have names. I'm no expert. But a top ring, a bottom ring, and then the wavy in between. And these, you really don't worry about gaps. These are awful thin. I don't think I'd try to file those. These, the first thing you do is when you get no, we'll just take one out. So when I first opened the box, first thing I did was take the one out of the top section. And in the box's paperwork, first thing to do is to identify what ring style you have. There's a 100% square, there's one with a bevel, there's one this style here. I went ahead and orange dotted which rings I had, so I know what style I have. And then on the ring itself, this is being a second bottom ring, I have bevel facing down and a dot that tells you the top. And the dot, man, I wish I could zoom in better. There it is. Just a matter of finding the right combination of light. And then the bevel's really hard to pick up, and I don't know if you're going to be able to see it or not, but this inside edge here is beveled, and that's going to be facing down. So once I figured out, first thing I did was figured out which ring I had, what markers I needed, and how they were going to be oriented in the bores. And then it comes down here to a compression ring installation. And here's where it tells you check in gap, and they recommend 0.004 per 1 inch of diameter as the minimum. So that's like as tight as you possibly want it. And then they talk about the 3-piece oil ring installation, which is these 3 pieces. 2 of those, 1 of these for every cylinder, or every piston, every cylinder as well. And they talk about staggering the gaps on them. So, with that information of 0.004 per 1 inch, I kind of do some math back here. It's not exactly written out in the correct format, but basically I got down to is 0.01757 round up to 0.018. That is my minimum gap. So if I wanted this thing tight, that's where I'd go. But Silverlight, the piston manufacturer, also talks about hyperautentic, which these are with the H suffix. These are HC 1131s. At least I think. Yeah. Nah, not 1131s. I think 1291, 1191. I think 1131s are FE motor. But they require an increase in ring gap of 40% on the top ring only. The second oil ring can use factory recommended end gaps. So, flip my paper back over. .018 multiplied by 0.4 for 40%. Basically, that, which gets you a number, and then you add 0.018 to it. It gets me 0.018 plus 0.00 or 0.072, which basically gives me my minimum gap of 0.025. Okay, so why did I go with 0.030? Well, in my research, if you're going to do any kind of boosted application, nitrous, supercharger, turbo, they tell you to increase the gap even more. And on those applications, depending on your boost, how much boost you plan on running, you could be 0.050, 0.060. You are really a loose top piston ring on boosted applications. I don't plan on boosting at all. But this is a fairly heavy, large truck, fairly heavy. It's going to have, well, it currently has 35, 12 and a half, 17-inch tires on it. I'm going to go to a 35, 10 and a half, just to get the tires underneath the truck a little bit better. And it has a winch on it. Plus, I may or may not try to tow with it once in a while. And the towing applications, when you're towing a heavy load, is going to generate more heat. More heat, metal expands, becomes tighter. Hence the reason why the hyper-utentic pistons ask for a larger gap, is because they heat and expand at a different rate. I figured I'd err on the side of caution and 0.005 over the minimum isn't going to be drastic. I don't plan on towing every day with it. I don't plan on towing max heavy super loads going up super grades. So most places are recommending like a gap of 0.040 if you're doing a heavy towing application. I went I went looser, but not as loose as some places recommend, because I don't really expect to tow a lot. But the truck's heavy, big tires. It probably going to run a little bit warm because it's got a lot of mass to move. So I went a little loose. Is it right? Could I have gotten away with that? Possibly. Could I have gotten away with that? Possibly, but do you really want the ring expanding and the piston expanding and being so tight that it pops the head of the pistons off? I don't care to find out. So I went loose. Just a skosh. So then it comes to the second ring. Second ring could be just standard factory spec, and that's where I'm at today, because I was going to come out here, throw a piston ring in a cylinder. You should give you a demonstration on how of that. Measure the end gap really quick, see where they are out of the box, and then decide if I want to go with that or if I want to go ahead and widen them up a little bit. If I remember correctly, when I checked one after I did the other 8, which is a long time, I was out here for I think 2-3 hours to do the 8 top rings. I think I threw in a second ring just to see where they were out of the box, and I think out of the box they're like at 0.25, and at 0.25 I'll probably just run them at that. Some guys like to run the second ring looser than the top ring. Some guys will run the second ring tighter than the top ring. A lot of it has to do with preference. There's probably some science behind it, but I think the majority of it comes to preference. I'm going to go with what the ring manufacturer says. They don't really talk about the second ring from Holley, but the piston manufacturer says the second ring could just be used factory recommended end gaps. So that's basically where I'm going to go. We'll come back over to the engine. I use about 1 inch down in the cylinder. So we'll take the piston, and I'm going to push the top ring down further because I'm just going to leave. I want to leave the rings in there so I know when I go to put the rings on the pistons, I just pull them from the cylinder and I keep them oriented because the pistons are already numbered. So second ring, top the dot up. One-handed is going to be fun. Set the piston in. And this is why I don't finish hone my cylinders till after I've done all my ring gaps. Now, if you take your edge in, send it out to a machine shop hones everything. I'd still take a minute to measure and check ring in gaps, but for the most part, you're probably going to be pretty good out of the box. Like these out of the box, if I was running cast pistons out of the box, they were all pretty much even, except for this cylinder was a little tight, this cylinder was a little loose. I would have probably, if this was professionally remanned and all the cylinders were perfect, I would have just ran them out of the box as is on a cast piston where I don't need the extra. I would have just ran them right out of the box as is. I probably would have filed just this one to loosen the gap to make it match the rest. And then this one would probably just be run a little loose. It wasn't horrendously loose, but it would have been a little loose. But if I had professionally had it machined, they should all be identical or really close to identical, depending on, did your machinist just do go to the standard bore size, or did he go to recommending what the piston manufacturer wants their clearances to be. And then when there's a little bit of variation between them, then that's when you're really going to want to file end gaps to make sure you don't have anything that's excessively tight. A little bit loose isn't going to make a huge difference. You start getting really big loose, and then you kind of lose a little bit of compression a little bit, but you do have multiple rings. So back to the task on hand. So pretty flush there, pretty flush on the back side. Rotate it to the 12 o'clock position. Pretty flush there, pretty flush there. So it's fairly square. Take my feeler gauges. Maybe I'll loosen up the thumb wheel on these to make it a little easier to maneuver. And I'm willing to bet you these are probably like 24, if I remember correctly. So grab my 24 gauge. And that one is 24. It fits, but it's got drag on it, so the sides of the rings are squeezing the... So this would be a 24, so I would take my Sharpie, write 24, pull it out of the cylinder, and see, the reason why I don't finish is because the edges of the rings create a little bit of a drag on them, or they're not really scratching, but they do create a drag. And you might want to put a light coat of oil on your rings if you're really concerned about it. I figure the oil film would create false readings, but I could be wrong. I'm no expert. I'm just some guy in a garage. Whoops. That's going to be a little deep. This one might be my tight cylinder. I'm willing to bet you it's like a 22. I got the 24 to fit, but it don't pull. It don't slide. So go through my gauges. I got a 20. There's a 22. For whatever reason, it seems to skip 23. Must not be a number that's used anywhere. 22. Really slight drag on it, not a lot. So my guess is it's probably like a 22, or 22 and a half, 23. Grab my Sharpie. We'll just call that a 23. Move to the next one. Exciting television, isn't it? Oops, I forgot to push the other piston down. So out this comes. And this one, if I remember correctly, was my larger gas cylinder. This is where measuring at the beginning kind of helps you get an idea of where you're going to be when you come to doing this type of gapping. So here's a 25. And the 25 is actually kind of fairly loose. So let's go find the 26. 26. Also fairly loose. So now we're getting into the combination type of stuff. So let's grab a 10 and a 17. You get to watch him fumble again. So there's a and even that's a hair on the loose side. Let's go back, find an 18. Exciting television. And there's 28 with a really slight drag on it. So my guess is it's probably closer to a 29. So obviously this isn't the ring I'd want to use in here. There's my flush there, flush there, flush there, flush there, pull out. Gaps down here. Now, I don't know if it matters where you measure gap at. I just put it down here because it's easiest to see. And in theory, it shouldn't be, but up here, you're kind of blind. You have to be, I mean, maybe if you're sitting on a stool or something. But down here, when you're standing over the engine, right here is fine. So there's a 24 gauge, and 24 here is like it was at the very first cylinder. So this would be a 24. Like I said, this was like a 29. Pull this ring out. Come over here and do it 4 more times, but I'm pretty sure you guys don't want to watch me do it 4 more times. So at this point, I'll shut the camera off, continue to do my ring gaps. Once I get all my ring gaps on, and then I'll go and bring the camera back out and film installing rings on pistons. And then at that point, I need to drop the crank out of this, clean it up, so run solvent through it. So if you look, I don't know if you can see that or not, come down underneath. So on the crankshaft, there's oil holes for the rod bearings. I like to run solvent through them with a basically like a pipe cleaner. Make sure they're clean. That's cleaned out and it'll oil properly. So for now, I'll pause the movie here or the video here and continue doing the boring stuff. Have a good day, and thanks for watching.